These are sheer criminals. They're also running some of the largest illegal animal fighting operations in the United States, if not the world.
Welcome to Our Hen House. This is Mariann Sullivan, and I am truly thrilled today to welcome the legendary Kudo, aka Richard Couto, and those are spelled differently, of the Animal Recovery Mission, or ARM, to Our Hen House. And he came to animal protection from a somewhat unusual background, I think, as he founded ARM in 2010 after, I see in your bio, retiring from Miami Beach real estate development. Now his undercover investigative work is legendary and known for exposing some of the most violent animal abuse operations worldwide, resulting in over 1,000 felony prosecutions, including his very well-known investigation of Fairlife dairy farms and a lot of illegal slaughterhouses, fighting operations. I did warn him not to get into too many gruesome details, but he lives with the gruesome details. So the work he's doing is just incredibly valuable. Before I get to that, I just want to remind you, for those of you who don't know, Our Hen House now has 4 podcasts. Rising Anxieties comes out on Tuesdays, The Hen Report on Thursdays, and the long form interview, which is what we're in now, on most Fridays, the Animal Law Podcast on the last Friday of the month. And of course, we're on YouTube. Please subscribe and like. But now let's get to this interview because I have really a lot of questions. Welcome, Kudo.
Thank you so much. And yes, I'll keep it light. We do some violent operations, so
Yeah.
I'll keep it on the down low a
Yeah.
little bit for it.
I think it's an ongoing problem with anybody interested in what's going on with animals. And one of the reasons I think that people don't know about it is because they can't bear to know about it, which is ridiculous. All right, but let's just take a step back. For those who aren't familiar with ARM, can you just briefly tell us your mission and then we can get into the details?
Yeah, at first our mission was just basically horse oriented and illegal horse slaughter in the greater Florida and Miami area. And then we opened our eyes a bit wider and widened our scope to basically dealing with the issues that no one else will deal with, whether it's private groups, governments, and if they are being dealt with, we will deal with them, such as factory farm investigations, but just put a different spin on it. So we do pride ourselves on doing anything and everything a little bit differently to get a better result and a different result for the animals.
Well, you have been getting great results. One of the things you're really good at is getting some good press. But let's start with that horse slaughter work, since, I mean, as you said, that's what you began with. And as I understand, it's still a pretty important part of the work that you do. I didn't know that illegal horse slaughter took place until I heard about your work, but it seems obvious that it would, because horse slaughter is illegal in this country. It's expensive to ship them to Canada and Mexico. So actually, it's not very surprising. But how do you find these places? They're generally pretty hidden, right?
They really are. It's an underground market and world, mainly in the state of Florida, although they are now spread out like a hand throughout the United States. And unfortunately, the market for horse meat is growing. Now, in the greater Miami area, it's something that I got into back in 2008 when I was a board member with the SPCA, when I was still a real estate developer. And the underground illegal horse meat market in Miami was so incredibly, number one, lucrative, selling horse meat for up to $40 per pound, but also sought after. So people were eating, and are today, eating this meat for municipal purposes, right? They think that it cures blood disorders, certain cancers, that it helps with side effects from chemotherapies. A lot of Cuban males are actually eating horse meat for the libido, thinking that it's stronger than Viagra, which is part of the reason why so many people are so desperate to get their hands on this meat. So desperate that they will actually break into barns in the middle of the night all over the state of Florida, and now, unfortunately, all over the United States. And they'll slaughter pet horses in their stalls in the middle of the night and harvest the quote unquote edible meat. And they're selling that on the black market from anywhere from $7 to $40 per pound. And what the engine is there is the illegal slaughterhouses. And those are the catalysts for this industry. So what ARM has been focusing on to get to those horse killers is going undercover in illegal slaughterhouses. And unfortunately, all the animals are looking at a very violent ending from meat in these facilities, everything from pigs, goats, sheep, cows, your typical quote unquote meat animals in the United States. But it's really the horse meat that is popular and that lucrative.
Yeah, I guess I mean, this is the last moment in the world that I would want to say anything that sounds vaguely anti-immigrant. So please don't take it this way. But the United States is kind of unusual in that the traditional culture has something of an aversion to horse meat. So it kind of makes sense, since it's a totally illegal meat, that it would have grown up in immigrant communities who come from countries where it's considered fine. Yeah, and I guess I knew, but I had kind of forgotten that these weren't just horse slaughter places. They were slaughtering other animals, but they were mostly illegal, right? And is there a big difference between what goes on at these places doing illegal slaughter and actual legal slaughter, which is really not so great either?
Yeah, the first question, these places are all illegal. None of these places, these farms, if you want to call them that, have any type of oversight by the USDA, by the FDA, by any local governments, by environmental departments. No one is looking at these. They're also not paying taxes. They are really organized crime. So we actually are dealing, once we stop an investigation, we take it to law enforcement. We usually take it to underground organized crime units that specialize in working with, well, people like us, investigators like ARM. These are catalysts, again, not for just selling other meats, but also these people are selling drugs at a large scale. They're selling guns, firearms, they're doing home invasions. These are sheer criminals. They're also running some of the largest illegal animal fighting operations in the United States, if not the world, specifically in the greater Miami area. All types of illegal activity. However, these people can make a dollar, they are. And as far as the immigrant subject, these are specifically Cuban Americans. So these are the people that in the, I guess I would call it the mountains in Cuba, they think that horse meat has elixing powers. Very similar to Asians eating a bear claw or bear bile, right? They think that that is a cure-all for them, which is why they're so
Or,
desperate at getting
or
this meat.
many American men eating steak for that matter.
That too, yeah. But that's why we're seeing
Every culture
such a
has its
dramatic
own
issue
like
there.
fantasies
It really does, yeah, it
about the
really does, and very rarely are they true.
yeah. All right, so this sounds insane. All right, so I guess this is how you got into animal fighting as well as illegal slaughter. You find these places and then you work, from what I understand, pretty closely with law enforcement from what you just said. So why is it I mean, why do they need a private organization to find these places? Is law enforcement just eager to jump on board but not doing the investigations?
Yeah, law enforcement are not trained, nor are they even funded to launch these investigations, nor do they even care. So, law enforcement aren't going to treat a crime against an animal similar to, drug enforcement going undercover with, let's say, certain cartels or large drug syndicates, or, going undercover with an auto theft group. They'll focus on that, but they won't focus on animals being brutalized and tortured. And that's fine because we're here. So as long as they will
Well,
actually take
it's
our
not fine.
well, it's not fine, but as long as they'll
Yeah.
take our cases and we'll do the work. Okay. The problem here, and this is something that everyone should know, even if you're in a state like Florida and you're in one county and you have an amazing relationship with, let's say, that sheriff's office or prosecutor, one county over, it is literally like going into a brand new country. You
Yeah.
have to make relationships
Yeah.
over again. And unfortunately, even though state laws and statutes are in black and white, everyone sees statutes differently and they read them differently. And you also have, one sheriff may be incredibly ethical, and say, wow, these animals are being brutalized. This place is being shut down. The next sheriff in the next town could care less about animals, nor that case, and they also don't want the workload. A lot of government workers do not want to work, so they will talk themselves out of taking a case such as ARM will develop for them to make themselves feel better, right? They get the round table, they'll talk themselves out of it, they feel better about themselves, and they let the crimes continue. And that's where the media comes into play in podcasts such as
Yeah.
this. And we'll get into that. But that's really the problem. If law enforcement took all of these cases, things would be very, very different, but they don't.
Yeah. I think that's the same absolutely everywhere and with any kind of animal abuse. There's law enforcement that gets it, that cares, that wants to do it. And I mean, it's like people. I mean, some people get it about animals and some people don't. And that's really true from what I've seen in just getting any kind of cruelty case investigated. It sounds like this work is very dangerous. Like insanely dangerous.
Yeah.
These sound like dangerous people,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about cartels and drugs. So, how dangerous is it and who's doing it? I mean, in addition to yourself.
Yeah, it's dangerous. And that's something that I figured out back in 2009, 2010, when I was shot at, 20, 30, 40 times, chased with axes and sledgehammers. All of these things contributed to an eye opening experience of what I was getting myself into, which at the time I did not know that organized crime was running these farms, how lucrative they were, and where there's a lot of money, especially when one organization, the Animal Recovery Mission, is their singular threat, and that is true, then they will do whatever they can to get to you. So, there was one year that I actually moved addresses and physical homes over 7 times. They were getting my information. I didn't know how. Well, it was because my name was on my utility bills, and they had friends within the electric company and the phone company, the cable companies. That's how they were getting my information. So I had to go a little bit deeper into more of black sites, which is what all of ARM's compounds and properties are right now. They are strictly black sites. Our properties are not listed and very secretive. And that's for a reason to protect not only our people, but our animals as well. But the majority of investigators at ARM are ex law enforcement, ex military contractors, State Department workers, operatives, military, special forces, as well as just regular straight civilians. And by the way, the civilian actually are stronger, better investigators globally. Your housewife with 3 children at home is a better investigator after she's trained a bit than special forces and ex law enforcement. It's incredible. But if you think about a mother's schedule and how they can multitask and stay calm, I believe that's a big attribute onto why they're so incredible in the field.
That's interesting. I mean, it would be obvious that I think women would be under less suspicion, though. Like, do they go in as buyers? What would be their excuse for why they're there and why they're looking around?
Well, we go undercover in a host of different ways. You can go in as customers if the farm is open to the public, if we can get their phone number. If not, then we're going to have to go in, we'll infiltrate in the middle of the night and we'll document their logbooks and their phone numbers, their customers, and then go in as a referral saying that we're a friend of a friend, one of their good customers. We'll meet these people at a gas station or a bar or at the grocery store. We'll track and follow them and have a quick, casual conversation about meat if they're in the meat area. And they say, oh, well, guess what? I have a farm. We produce meat. Why don't you come by and grab a pig? That's really how these relationships start. And once we're undercover for a
Okay.
while, we want the biggest charges that we possibly can. So, unfortunately, documenting a few pigs or goats being killed, which is very violent, by the way, and violates state law, it's really the horse meat that these people are really going to see prison time for, and the narcotics and the firearms.
Well, yeah, yeah.
So,
You talked about getting cooperation from state authorities, but what about federal authorities?
federal authorities, we work very, very closely at times with the USDA, the FSIS division of the USDA, which is the Food and Safety division of the USDA. They're in charge of investigating and ensuring that our food supply is safe. We will take cases to them. We've shut down many farms with them. So I have been trained, and I actually have trained USDA investigators myself at our compound. Now, they are on board when we bring them an illegal facility, and we work very, very well together. They're not on board when we bring them a legal facility like a dairy or a slaughterhouse or an egg
Yeah,
facility
yeah,
that's investigated or overseen by their department. Then that's where we have a serious
yeah.
breakdown.
Fascinating. Yeah, I want to get into that. I just want to ask you one more question, I think, about the illegal slaughterhouse and organized crime kind of side of what you do, and then get more into the specifically the Fairlife, but there might be other legal facilities that you investigate as well. And that is a fascinating insight, the difference in federal interests for people who are probably doing much the same thing to animals. But I do have this one more question about media. You seem to be very good at getting media And I'm just curious as to how, to some extent, I guess that seems obvious because your stories are, they're
Mhm.
exciting. I mean, it makes a good
Yeah.
story. But what are your relationships with the press and how do you cultivate that and how do you get that good
How we
press?
really started before I even went public with illegal horse slaughter in Miami, when I was with the SPCA, I looked at it because nothing was happening. And I said, the only way we're going to have traction here is if we get the press on our side and have these elected officials and elected sheriffs and
Yeah.
attorneys start doing their jobs. So it was a slow process, but I really did it through illegal horse slaughter because a lot of people love a big, beautiful thoroughbred off a racetrack and seeing them butchered alive and seeing that meat being sold underground in a,
Yeah. No, it horrifies
yeah,
Americans.
absolutely.
Horrifies them.
But that is how I brought horse slaughter into all of our and other investigations because finally we had that following from the greater press and on a national scale. So
Yeah.
the CNNs, the Fox Newses, ABC, CBS, and really globally. And they just started to wrap their arms around our work in the animal recovery mission. Everything that we did was legal and held merit. We were truthful and walked the line, and they knew that. So they trusted that our investigations were legit, and that's important too. So that was really the catalyst on why we've gotten so many felony and misdemeanor arrests, close to 1,000, if not possibly over, because of the relationship with the press. Law enforcement and government would have never done this work if they didn't know that we had the backing of the press. And that's what they are today, fearful of. They're not fearful of the animal recovery mission. They're fearful of the people that are joining the stories on the investigation if they do not take it and make arrests.
It does seem like getting press. There's a great logic to, and I really like the fact that the horse slaughter, as horrific as it has been, was this key to your getting a lot of this press because so many people care about it, and then you get the other animals brought in. But it feels like the work you do against Fairlife is, and we mentioned this at the beginning of the interview, is really different. And you mentioned that you had a, much different relationship with the feds because of it. And for those who aren't familiar with it, can you tell us about your work against Fairlife? I think it started with the Fair Oaks investigation, but it's gone on since there. So can you just give us like the story of how that came about, since it was kind of a different project for you, and what you've done since then?
Yeah, investigating dairy farms, number one, is near and dear to my heart and everyone at arms because of the brutality in the dairy industry, bar none. It is some of the worst in the world, right? And as far as animals go, Fairlife had a campus they were using to educate the greater public on dairy consumption and how incredible farms are. And that's a place called Fair Oaks Farms in Indiana. It's really an amusement park geared towards educating the public on the incredibleness, if that's even a word, on the dairy industry. So I went out to see what it was all about, and I took the dairy adventure tour, and it was incredible. And
Yeah.
the cows looked well cared for, and yada yada yada. And that's what the public was seeing. I knew that that wasn't the reality of the dairy industry. So we launched the largest dairy investigation in history on Fair Oaks Farms and on Fairlife, owned by Coca-Cola. And the brutality that stemmed from that investigation. And by the way, Coca-Cola and Fairlife, well, it's in the name Fairlife, right? Saying how incredible they are to their cows, how they just love them. They're part of the family. Everything is animal care awareness. Um, and that's nothing true in that statement during investigation. And we showed the public that. And what were they charging a premium to the public for Fairlife? And we showed a very different side and a different story there, which after our investigation led to the largest settled class action lawsuit in history of animal agriculture. So they had to pay out $21 million, but also adhere to a host of restructuring for the animals, for animal welfare by the court and overseen by the court. Put cameras in all areas where there are interactions with animal and people, cameras throughout any in all areas of the dairy, overseen by veterinarians and managers. An animal care advisory council was set up by Coca-Cola. All of these little areas where Coca-Cola now is using as a catalyst to promote their product once again and say how incredible they are because of the investigation that ARM did in 2019, which there was widespread media and widespread havoc, by the way, on not only Fairlife, but on Coca-Cola. Everyone was canceling their contracts with Coca-Cola and Fairlife milk, right? Just about half of the retailers in the entire US were wiping their shelves clean of Fairlife, saying they would never sell the product ever again. And this was a new acquired company for Coca-Cola. So, and they were investing billions into it. So they knew that they had to change that reputation. And that's how they were doing it, by all these different areas that they were going to make improvements on. Well, we wanted to see if those improvements were actually put in place. So we went undercover in 2023 and one of the same exact farms that we went undercover in 2019. And what did we find out?
And just let me make clear, they own a lot of different farms, right? Or they do business with a lot of different farms. Are the farms privately owned and then they buy the milk from them?
You got it. You got it. But what's different with Fairlife is that they have so much influence on these farms. They can tell them to handle their animals properly, to train their employees more. They have to adhere to guidelines and oversight, by the way. So Fairlife and Coca-Cola will send their people to do unannounced audits and inspections whenever they want. So they have a very different relationship with their supplying dairy farms, right? They're more controlled by Coca-Cola than any other dairy in the world. What we found in 2023, the crimes against the animals was worse than in 2019. Well,
My
how can
God.
this be? And they adhered to all of these different changes, right? So now what is Coca-Cola doing? We just investigated two other dairy farms in Indiana because they just built a monstrous plant now in Goodyear, Arizona, right outside of Phoenix, right? Miles from Phoenix. We went undercover in two supplying dairy farms there. The crimes were so incredibly horrific, not just to the animals, but to the environment, to the employees. It was incredible. And what did they do? They did adhere to all of these changes. And I'm talking about the supplying dairy farms, which was Butterfield Dairy and Rainbow Valley Dairy. And we were undercover there for 3 months. And in 2023, when we went undercover, Fairlife denied taking the dairy from that facility. What Fairlife is now doing is deny, deny, deny until we have to finally admit that we were in the wrong. Why are they doing that right now? And I'm talking about this because we have a new investigation coming out next week that we're going to get into. But the more that they deny, the more that they can actually push off media so that news stations will be actually scared to do stories on this particular investigation because they think it's false. They think that Fairlife actually isn't taking this product, but actually they're lying, right? But in Arizona, they did admit to taking the dairy farms, but they also said that they were going to cut ties, never take the milk, never take the dairy ever again. So what did we do? We hired private investigators that went out and followed the milk trucks because their milking delivery schedules that were always during the day were now at the darkness of night at 2 a.m., at 4 a.m. Why were they doing that? We wondered. So our private investigators, who were actually ex-law enforcement detectives in Phoenix, followed the milk trucks. Where did we follow them to? To Fairlife. They never
Wow.
stopped taking this dairy. These investigations were released a mere 3 months ago. So what did we do when we stopped that investigation? We went undercover and sent our investigators into New Mexico. So Fairlife has a host of supplying dairy farms in the greater Roswell area. And once we were hired there, the crimes began. Misdemeanor and felony crimes towards the animals in these Fairlife supplying dairies began 5 minutes after we were undercover there. 5 minutes. The brutality was so incredibly over the top. They were actually taking babies out, chaining their back legs, and taking them out of mothers when the mothers were not in labor. Think of, if there are mothers out there, think of what the pain and agony that would do to your physical body and your baby. But these supplying Fairlife dairy farms wanted that baby out of the mother so fast to put her on the milking line because that is money in her udder. And those babies, by the way, so everyone understands, in a dairy farm, wherever, if it's Fairlife or any other dairy, those babies are ripped from that mother the second they're born. They don't
Yeah.
waste a minute to separate the mother and the baby. So right there is inherently cruel. And the mothers fight and scream and chase after their babies. Dairy cows and cows in general are actually better mothers, and there's a greater connection between them and their offspring as a human being mother to their baby. And these mothers are artificially impregnated and they're forced to give birth every single year of their life just to have that baby ripped from them. The brutality is just over the top.
Is there any involvement from law enforcement, or is your goal here mainly just to get attention and to get press regarding this? I mean, because these are in violation of the law. They like to pretend that the laws don't apply to them, but if you can find somebody to charge them, I think it is illegal.
Sure,
So what's the plan? What do you do with the information?
we do get a lot of arrests. So our packet was just sent to the Roswell Sheriff's Office, and we haven't heard from him yet. He's had it for 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
what's going
Yeah.
on? We're not certain. The packet that we gave, the investigation that we gave to Arizona in Phoenix, the Department of Agriculture in Arizona has just stated it's an ongoing investigation, although they're not going to be making arrests because ARM isn't a credible organization and they don't believe our footage is credible. Remember, we have up to 1,000 felony arrests with law enforcement. You can't get more credible than that,
Mm.
along with a staff of ex-government workers, right? Um, we're hoping that that changes in Arizona. We're hopeful that charges are gonna come down in Chavez County by the Chavez Sheriff's Office in Roswell for the farm we were undercover there from Coca-Cola, which, by the way, comes out at the beginning of this coming week. No one knows about this investigation yet. Okay, it's going to be a bombshell. But mainly, our main focus on dairy farms is education. So, how much do we really care and expect actual arrests? It's really probably going to come down to the smaller
Yeah.
ranch hand that's going to be arrested. What difference is that going to make? The difference is people need to understand they are in control of this industry. You don't have to buy this product anymore. The dairy industry is taking a tumble right now because of the plant-based milk world, right? People are starting to understand that it's healthier, better for the environment, and that there is no animals involved in plucking an almond off a tree and making an incredible tasting product with it. The dairy industry no longer has to exist, and that's what we're trying to push on basically the buying power public is you are in control.
Have you considered, and you don't have to answer this if this is private information, but lawsuits, because it really does sound like Fairlife is doing some serious consumer deception about, their welfare practices that are being violated. And there have been an increasing number of lawsuits in the animal area for deceiving people about the care that is being given to the animals. It sounds like the information you're gathering might really be useful in that area, given that it's Fairlife and they do a lot of PR.
Well, funny you brought that up. The day that we released the investigation in Arizona, we also dropped a second class action lawsuit on Fairlife and Coca-Cola for again deceiving the public again for their animal care tactics and selling their product for a premium, right? So now they're looking at that. Well, that class action was just updated, and now the New Mexico investigation is tied into that very large class action lawsuit that Coca-Cola and Fairlife are going to have a very, very
Excellent.
hard time with. Fairlife is just going to have a very hard time with the amount of lawsuits that are going to be handed down to them stemming from these new investigations by ARM, and they should be.
Yeah, that's really good news. And just on a personal note, I want to mention I live in Rochester, New York, which is upstate near Lake Ontario, and Fairlife is just opening a huge facility. And dairy production in New York is, with the support of the governor,
Sure.
being expanded,
Yeah.
probably to service that facility largely.
Yeah.
And anytime you want to visit, you
Mhm.
can stay at my place.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We know about the
'Cause,
facility. We know
we're
about the
it's
facility. Yeah.
right down the road.
Yeah.
I could just
Yeah.
it drives me insane. But that's on a personal note. Let's get back to you. All of the topics you have to talk about are fascinating and deserve an even deeper dive, but I know that you've expanded internationally and your scope is really interesting, the things that you have chosen to do. And so I really don't want to skip over that. Can you just talk a little bit? I think you've done some work in Nepal and Bangladesh, perhaps, is it? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we just actually got out of Bangladesh mere days ago. So we were there for about 2 weeks. Bangladesh, in Nepal, and in India, we focus on the Hindu religions. They sacrifice millions and millions and millions of animals, right? As well as some of the Muslim religions. And this was just their new year. And we wanted to cover in Bangladesh, in the capital of Bangladesh, where they sacrificed basically in front of us well over 10 million animals. And that was specifically cows, water buffalo, goats, sheep, but
So
many.
this is that huge, like, event,
It's a huge event globally.
or is it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You may be thinking about
yeah.
Gadamai in Nepal, which is
I think I
a
am.
very
I
large
think I am.
sacrifice at
But it's similar to that.
one small temple. It is similar to that, but more of a
Okay.
global holiday. It takes place in just about
Yeah,
every city
yeah.
in the world. But Bangladesh, literally in 24 hours or 48 hours, the streets are rivers of blood. It is incredible.
Why did you decide to expand to this particular I mean, it must be a big logistical shift for you to be operating internationally.
It is, but we've always done animal sacrifice, let's say in Miami with
Okay.
Santeria, Balamayombe, some voodoo that a lot of people in Miami do. So we were trained on how to investigate those crimes, and they are crimes. We looked at international because no one was really going into these zones because they were dangerous. Well, it's what we love to do, right? We really treat it as a sport, right? It gets your adrenaline up. Our guys are trained to go into the Middle East. These are people that have gone and done tours in Iraq and Afghanistan and even more
Right.
dangerous cities.
Right.
They love doing it. So why not have that mentality focusing on something that actually does good for the world and helps one of the most innocent
How
things?
does it do good? What's the plan here? I mean, you've gathered this footage. What's the plan of how to do something with it?
The plan is education. We actually educate the greater population and the younger populations in Bangladesh and in Nepal, in different areas of India that have never really seen some of these festivals as deep as we go. We also deal with, if it's an American company that's, let's say, in Nepal, that is dealing with one of their largest industries, the trekking industry, right? Hiking the Himalayas, and that's North Face. We'll go and we'll have meetings with the heads of North Face, and North Face is such a important revenue company for Nepal for tourism that will have pressure put on the federal government of Nepal through companies like North Face and other corporations. And changes have been made by taking that type of route. So we wouldn't still be doing it if we haven't seen positive change from it. We're just not going to
Mhm.
go and do an investigation for a social media post. It's not what we're about. But if we can have real results from it, then we're going to keep doing it, which is why we keep going back to the Middle East and going undercover in these areas.
When you started doing this, I guess to some extent, one thing led to another. But why did you decide to focus on this really gruesome stuff? I mean, everything to do with animals, like, ends up being pretty gruesome, but you have really chosen the worst of the worst to dive into and know a lot of things that most people don't want to know.
Yeah, we do that because not a lot of other organizations are doing it. And a lot of other organizations don't have the staff that are trained to, let's say, go into dark areas of Asia, of the Middle East, and we want to put ourselves in that dangerous spot, similar to Paul Watson, right? Sending his people into the
Right.
open
Yeah.
oceans. There's probably nothing more dangerous than that. But we have a pledge to risk our lives for animals. And that's exactly what we do. And unfortunately, not enough people within other organizations on a global scale are doing that. It's more comfortable to go in and get a little bit of footage in a less dangerous area. That's fine too, because a lot's coming for animals coming from those investigations. But it's really the dark, deep, dark zones, the darkness that we have to shine a light on. And that's why we're doing it, where we're doing it. And it's what we're good at.
Yeah. And, you know, from what I understand, there's been some significant research been done relatively recently that shows that the best way to change people's behavior towards animals, particularly when it comes to food, but other things as well, probably, is to get them to watch horrible footage. I mean, it does have an enormous impact on people,
Yeah.
but it's really hard to get anybody to watch it. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the trick, and not shut it off. Do you have any techniques in ways to use your footage to try to encourage people to at least watch it enough so that they know what's going on?
Yeah, well, we usually put out two different versions per investigation. One is the cold, hard facts, and that's brutal, brutal footage, which we do. You're absolutely right, get very few views on that. I even have a hard time watching it. And then we
Yeah.
we put in another video for that investigation, which is a bit softer, although highly educational, and that is very viewable by individuals out there. So the content we put out is all over the board, where it's viewable, it's very, very violent. But you're right, we want it to be watched. We want people to learn from these investigations. And the best way to help animals, because people always ask, how can I help animals in this investigation? And the simple, cold, hard fact, and a lot of people don't like hearing it, is from me and our employees is sit back and think of changing your diet. And that is how you can help animals. Because guess what? Whether it's a Fairlife farm or a slaughterhouse that's investigated by the USDA and overseen by the USDA, or a festival in Nepal or in India, or an illegal slaughterhouse and horse slaughter, if people didn't consume animal products, there would be none of those.
Yeah.
Simply put.
I
And it's a very taboo topic. And it was a taboo topic for me. I was the greatest meat eater I knew. I would eat meat 6 times a day. I would drink 2 gallons of milk per week. It was very difficult. It was a very uh, timely thing for me to go plant based and vegan. It took 5 years to do. In other words, it doesn't have to happen overnight. You can look at dairy.
yeah.
Dairy was the easiest thing for me to X out of my diet because there are tastier products out there than cow's milk and goat's milk. And then you can go from there. So it doesn't have to be, okay, tomorrow morning I'm going vegan. No, don't do it that way. Take your time, do research, start tasting products at your grocery store, and do it that way. And that's how people can help.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear how you connect the work you do and the videos you get, which are not necessarily, I mean, except for Fairlife, which really is dealing with the industry, are not necessarily about the industry. They're about the worst of the worst, but it's still all the same. The solution for most people, the beginning of the solution anyway, is really the same. And I'm really glad to hear you making that. Well, I've kept you for a long time, and we're going to do a bonus section in which you have some very, really exciting information to share. I understand, but it can't come out until next week. So we're holding off on that because our bonus section comes out next week. But before, there's one more question I want to ask, and I wasn't sure whether to ask this, but a lot of what you've brought up has made me think of it. And I mean, gender is such a fraught topic, but so much of our culture associates masculinity with meat eating and with subduing or killing animals or hunting or, just doing bad things to animals is seen as masculine.
Mhm.
I mean, clearly masculinity is a value. I don't know whether you'd call it a value, but it's a factor in the kind of work you do and the kind of work your people do. These undercover investigators who go in, and you said that they love the adrenaline rush and the excitement. I mean, and I'm not saying that these are things that are exclusive to men. You get so nervous talking about gender, you get in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
But can you just offer your thoughts about how it might be possible for the kind of work you're doing and other people are doing to shift that perception of harming animals to protecting? I mean, protecting the innocent is such an important positive attribute of traditional values of masculinity. I'm more giving a lecture than asking a question, but can you just share your thoughts on that?
Yeah. We have some tough guys at our and women.
It sounds like it.
These aren't your run of the mill type of vegans that you would imagine. These aren't tree hugging people. Okay, they're just your average Joe walking down the street, but tough guys and tough women. There's really nothing tougher than sticking up for the weak. Period.
Yeah.
That's what soldiers do in battle. That's what law enforcement does. That's what anyone and everyone does. Let's say walking down the road and seeing a child being picked on. Well, that big guy, big burly guy that walks up and defends that child is thought of as a hero, but not that big burly guy going in and defending an animal that is being bludgeoned to death. That's a hero in my eyes. And that's a person that I would
Yeah.
look at and say, wow, okay, you're a good guy. There is that perception of being, big and strong and having to eat meat, but I think that's shifting now. Some of the larger, more in shape people at ARM, and these are big, muscular people, have been plant based and vegan for a really, really long time. Perception
Oh,
here,
yeah.
the
Yeah.
perception is protein. So this is important to say in your podcast because a lot of people think that protein comes from meat, and it does not. Protein comes from vegetables. Nothing with a heartbeat on this planet produces protein. The only thing that produces protein on planet Earth grows out of the ground is the vegetable. The only reason why an animal or us have protein in our body, a pig, a goat, a cow, is because it eats plants, right? So why not get that protein from broccoli or kale or even iceberg lettuce? That's where the strength is coming from. And I've learned that over the past handful of years, right? Because I thought we're all lied to by propaganda and false education by the USDA and by the food companies. So people need to understand that protein doesn't come from animals, it comes from vegetables. So when you go to the gym, you're going to be stronger eating kale and broccoli than you are a T-bone steak, right? And I know that for a fact because I made that switch. So the whole masculinity thing, I think, is changing, and I think that's a great thing.
That's
But
good.
you nailed it with that perception. But fortunately, that perception is changing, and we're becoming
I really hope you're
smarter,
right.
and we're evolving as a race.
I really hope you're right. I like the way you put that. Uh, they talk about like the crisis amongst boys and boys don't know and nobody seems to talk about this sense of, or maybe people are talking about it. I'm just not hearing them out of masculinity. As a value is about protecting the innocent, as you eloquently put it, not
Yeah.
attacking the innocent. And the animals there's nobody more innocent. Anyway, I won't give another speech. Before I let you go and we move on to bonus, just tell people where they can keep track of your work.
People can go to animalrecoverymission.org. That's our main website. There you can see two organizations. Actually, we're split out of two nonprofit organizations. There's the Animal Recovery Mission, and then there's Armed Sanctuary. We do have the largest animal sanctuary in the state of Florida, one of the largest in the United States. And that is mainly due because we strike and raid so many properties with law enforcement. Whatever animals are left on those sites, we have to take them, right? So that's why we started Armed Sanctuary, and all the animals come to our site. We have roughly 700 animals at our compound. They never leave. They're of course, never sold. They're never adopted out. They live in the sanctuary setting, cared for by a very large staff and loved after. We also use that farm as training for the undercover investigator prior to them going into the field. We also use that property and those animals as rehabilitation for those investigators that are PTSD positive to come back and work with those
Wow.
animals, slow things down after being undercover at a farm such as Fairlife, and they can decompress. So we have a decompression program, and we use those animals for that. So we're not only helping those animals, but those animals are also helping us as people.
Wow.
And that's the importance of it. And that's where ARM differs from any other organization in the world. No one else has that system, and it works. But again, animalrecoverymission.org is where they can
And
go.
I didn't know about that. I'm really glad that you let us know about that. Thanks so much for everything you're doing, Kudo, and thanks for joining us today on Our Hen House. And thanks to you out there for tuning in. Please remember to subscribe on your favorite podcatcher and or on YouTube if you're watching this, or even if you're not watching it, maybe you can start watching. Or subscribe there anyway because it helps us out. Also, if you want to become a flock member or make a donation of any kind, you can at ourhenhouse.org/support.